Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Joel Rosen. I am an adrenal fatigue recovery ninja, and today I want to welcome you back to another edition of your Adrenal Fix. Today I wanted to talk to you about adrenal fatigue and stomach acid. To me, the whole antacids, the proton pump inhibitors, all of these foods, or sort of these prescriptions or over-the-counters are the biggest scam in American history, in my opinion, in terms of getting the American public to feel that they have a too much stomach acid problem. Yes, it's true that they have a lot of indigestion, and eating 6 pizza slices will do stuff like that to you, or having really crappy based foods that are processed and artificial and not really even real foods that we get in the fast food market, or we get in the frozen foods, or we get in the packaged foods, will create a big problem for breaking down your foods and cause your body to have some acidity. But ultimately, I want you to realize that each cell has about 3 million methyl groups that are required for digestion in our lifetime. And 1,800 of them are spent when you eat cooked foods above 212 degrees Fahrenheit. And I mean, who of us eat foods less than that if we're not eating raw-based foods? I mean, we're cooking things on barbecues, in ovens, in hopefully not microwaves, deep fried stuff. Even these new pizza places that they heat up the ovens to 500 degrees, and really what it does is it cooks the snot out of foods to the point where there's no good quality digestive enzymes in there, and there's actually no good quality of fuel or nutrients in there. But what ultimately happens is it causes us to burn through 1,800 methyl groups, versus if you ate raw foods, you would burn through 1,200 methyl groups. So it's a 600 deficit when you eat raw foods. And the point of the matter is, we're really engineered to eat raw foods. And so when we say raw foods, obviously we're talking about good quality produce, seeds and nuts and legumes, and even fibrous stuff and lettuce and cabbage and things that we plant, as long as they are mineral rich, chemical free stuff. That's what our body's been engineered to eat. And if you do want to cook foods, you can slow heat them, and you can eat fermented foods like sauerkrauts and kombachas and even some of these kefirs. But as soon as you pasteurize them, then what's going to happen is they are going to break down all those enzymes that were effective in the first place. And why even eat those? It's like dead food. So anyways, the whole point is when we're eating foods that are highly cooked, we burn through our stomach acid, our stomach reserves. And as a result, we lose the ability to disinfect the food. And as a result, that food sits there and it rots, and it gets infected. Just think about food that would be out in the field that was just there, sitting there, and it would obviously get flies around it and critters around it and maybe small animals around it. And I say we have a small ecosystem in our GI tract as well. And what happens is when your food goes undigested, it creates this putrefaction, and it creates a lot of lactic acid. As a result, that lactic acid is going to create a reflux. And that's what the stomach acid that doctors prescribe proton pump inhibitors to try to nullify. But what it does is it nullifies the lactic acid, which does create, a burning sensation. And it also, nullifies your own HCl acid. So there's nothing there. And you're not fixing the problem of too little stomach acid creating too much lactic acid, thereby being inhibited by a proton pump inhibitor. Not to mention, the FDA has warnings on proton pump inhibitors for decreasing your magnesium absorption. And magnesium is important for so many cofactors for producing energy. So now all of a sudden you're having food that's sitting and rotting and creating inflammation in your body. It's creating bacteria overgrowth, unhealthy colonization, proliferation of molds or candidas. Imagine if you're not squishing stomach acid and a food has fungus or mold or mycotoxins or bacteria or viruses or, God forbid, parasites. You don't have that stomach acid to secrete and kill and break down and absorb. So some of the things that we look at, and then how does that relate to adrenal fatigue? The way it relates to adrenal fatigue is that you have to settle down that inflammation somehow, and the adrenals are endogenous cortisol is like cortisone and prednisone and anti-inflammatories. That's what they do. So now they're called in to constantly try to settle down that inflammation. So a couple of things I want you to be aware of is when you look at your blood work, look at your protein levels, and if you see the value should be between 6.9 to 7.4. That's the healthy range. So if you're 6.8 or 7.5, you are not breaking down your protein effectively, and ultimately you have something called hypochloridria, which means you're not secreting enough stomach acid, you're not breaking down your proteins, and then you are not able to disinfect your foods. You're going to create more absorption issues, you're going to create more inflammation, you're going to drain the adrenals, you're going to not have the micronutrients on board. The other thing we would look at is the globulin levels, and globulin should be between 2.4 to 2.8. So if you're 2.1 or you're 2.9 or 3.0, again, you are going to have hypochloridria. You're not secreting enough stomach acid. And guess what you're doing? You're having proton pump inhibitors and Prilosec and all of these things that are causing even further problems, not to mention we're eating, trans fat foods, we're eating moldy foods, we're eating foods that are highly temperatured and heated to the snot comes out, if you will, and we're really creating these huge problems. People ask me, well, how come low globulin and high globulin are the same thing? Hypochloridria, or how come high protein and low protein are the same thing? And when you say I eat a lot of protein or I don't eat a lot of protein, this is the protein that is actually absorbed and is in the bloodstream. So if it's high, you're not breaking it down effectively. If it's low, you're not absorbing it, and it's not keeping up with supply and demand effectively, and it leads to the same road. And in our biology, in our chemistry, a lot of the times high something and low something equals the same something. And what I mean by that is if we have high glucose and low glucose, it's going to lead to the same road of insulin resistance. And if you have high protein and low protein, it's going to lead to the same road as hypochloridria or lack of absorption. Now why would we maybe have lack of absorption? Well, we told you you're burning through your HCl reserves. You are eating foods that are requiring you to squish a lot of stomach acid, and you're not eating enough healthy raw-based foods to be able to preserve those methyl groups, to preserve, not to mention, let's say I have a bacteria infection or I have a mold or I have a candida, then all of a sudden it creates inflammation, and my parietal cells are no longer able to make enough intrinsic factor or hydrochloric acid to break that down, which leads me to the next problem. The next problem is all of a sudden, because you're not squishing enough stomach acid on there, you are not going to absorb your B12 and your iron. And when you don't absorb B12 and iron, B12 is going to create a lot of neurological problems, and iron is going to create a huge amount of problems. I mean, we need iron in order to make neurotransmitters. Dopamine needs tyrosine to be made, and tyrosine needs phenylalanine and iron to make that. So we may not have enough dopamine, and then all of a sudden we're always looking for a little bit of a jolt, we never feel pleasure, we're depressed, we don't feel good, we need to continue to have pleasure-seeking behaviors, and a lot of it is due because we're not absorbing our iron. We also need, obviously, iron to make oxygen be able to go in the blood. So if we're not providing oxygen in the blood and in the hemoglobin, and our hematocrit is low, or our RBC isn't creating enough iron-based oxygen capacity carrying blood cells, then we're not bringing enough oxygen to the cells, and we need oxygen to breathe, and our cells need oxygen to breathe and to make ATP. All of a sudden you don't have energy, and it has a lot to do with not absorbing enough stomach acid. It wipes out the adrenals because it can't keep up with the demand of settling inflammation, and then all of a sudden we're taking proton pump inhibitors and we're cooking the snot out of our foods. The other thing we need iron for is antioxidants. Our cofactors for catalase is iron, and SOD is iron. So if you're not producing enough iron, you don't have the firefighters of the cell to put out the fires, and all of a sudden you have this free radical buildup, and it creates this feed-forwarding vicious cycle. So it's crazy. The next thing I would say is, as a result of not being able to break down your food, and it sits there and rots and ferments and creates all of this inflammation, you're going to have infections. You're going to have bacteria infections and mold and candida and nasty parasites, and that is going to create a ecosystem of competing organisms competing for a certain amount of foods. And all of a sudden your pH levels go down, and there's not a lot of oxygen, and they love this. They love an acidic environment with no oxygen. They deplete our minerals, they eat up our iron, and they form this colony, and they say, hey, come over here, we can all be buddies, and we can form these biofilms, and once we get to be a certain size, the immune system can't do anything. And let's piggyback with the metals, and the heavy metals, and the mercury, and the cadmium, and the aluminum, and then we're going to create this sort of super ecosystem where we don't get touched at all. Yeah, I'm crazy. So infection's a huge thing. The next thing it can create is leaky gut. Doctors don't even believe in leaky gut, but it's a real phenomena. It is intestinal permeability, where that gut lining breaks down, and when that gut lining breaks down, you have undigested food particles that get into your immune system, and now you have cross-reactivities and autoimmunities and food sensitivities. And every time you eat gluten, dairy, corn, soy, egg, rice, potatoes, all these types of things, because not only are they sprayed with GMOs and pesticides and a lot of organophosphates, you are also going to create an immune system response because that food that's fermenting is just breaking down that intestinal lining, and now you continue to break down the adrenals because you have more inflammation from the food that you're reacting to that's now become adulterated, and your body is reacting to it. The other thing, so that would create food sensitivities. The last thing it's going to do is obviously it's going to create absorption issues. So now we have micronutrient deficiencies. The bacterias and all these ecosystem invaders are robbing our ecosystem. So now we have no iron. They steal from our B vitamins. So now we're not able to make antioxidants like CoQ10 and glutathione, and we have oxidation and a lot of problems. And it really all started with our inability to produce stomach acid from the foods that we're eating that are cooked to all get out, as people like to say, and then we're going on stomach acids blockers to make the problem even worse. So I just wanted to give you a little heads up on that. Hopefully you found this really valuable. I'd love to give you a free 45-minute consultation to discuss if you have some of these things going on and what we can do about it. But I always say, don't sign up if you're not serious to get your life back and to be able to really take the bull by the horns and figure out what's going wrong with you and how to fix that. Because I read on these forums that it takes a long time to fix adrenal fatigue, and while that may be true in terms of there's a lot of things going wrong, if you hone in and really put a lot of the pieces of the puzzle together in the right combinations, in the right orders, at the right sequences, at the right times, there's no reason why you can't fix this quickly, fastly, is that a word, fastly? Quickly, rapidly, and also, fix your metabolism so that you're not fatigued and you're not exhausted and you don't crash in the middle of the day. You don't have joint pains, you have weight fall off, you get into your skinny jeans, you're focused, you're calm, you're collected, you're cool, you have pain that is going away, you have more pleasure and contentment, you fall asleep. and you enjoy your life and you go on with it and you make your energy levels go through the roof, and then on top of that you start to enjoy what you're doing with your life. So it is possible, and so I'll put a link in here so that you guys can sign up for that, and we can tell you how to do that. So hopefully you found that effective and helpful, and there's no swearing in this particular video, and hope you guys have a great day. Take care.